Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Wix. So, I know this video is about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, but I want to start by asking, hey, remember the Justice League? It opened up around this time last year and was Warner Brothers' attempt to really kickstart an entire DC universe without giving every character a solo movie first. And it failed. And many people were like, of course it did, there's no way that concept, that way of world building could have worked in the first place. In a strange way, this movie actually does a similar thing. It is franchise filmmaking first and foremost. I'm sure Sony would love this to launch a Miles Morales franchise, a Spider-Woman franchise, hell, maybe even a Spider-Ham one. Honestly, it all sounded a little cynical to me, and even after the interesting trailers, I was a little bit skeptical. I even made a video a few months ago about all the possible pitfalls that this premise could lead to. And sitting in the theater, I was pretty amazed to watch the movie swing around pretty much every single one of them. A lot of attention has been paid to the look of the movie, and for good reason. But it's the script that I was really impressed by, and how it managed to exceed my expectations at pretty much every turn. So in this video, I'm going to dig into that. I'm going to try not to get too spoilery or talk about plot points that aren't really given away in trailers or scenes released online. But I am going to talk about character motivations a lot, so if you're super spoiler phobic, maybe come back to this later. But in general, I'm not going to be giving away any big plot points.
Swinging from building to building, running around in a hot costume. Sometimes I wonder why.
Into the Spider-Verse is the most naturalistic CG animated movie I've really ever seen. That's kind of a weird thing to say about a movie that features a talking pig with spider powers, but I really think it's true. There's just something to the flow of simple conversations in this movie that totally sets it apart from most animated films. I had been worried that the Spider-Verse concept would completely overshadow Miles' story, but the first act immediately let me know that wasn't going to be the case at all. Scenes between Miles and Jefferson, his kind of uptight police officer dad, have been shown off a lot in previews, but I was still really impressed with how much depth was presented here. I've always liked Miles Morales, but I think this version of him is probably my favorite, and gives him a more distinct personality away from Peter Parker than many others have managed to. At the same time though, I think the best origins for any Spider character, whether it's Miles, Miguel O'Hara, Gwen Stacy, or obviously Peter Parker, will always involve one thing. Young characters that have an enormous responsibility placed on them kind of out of nowhere, that then need to decide what kind of person they want to be. That's the through line of Miles' story, and we can see it play out in the two people he looks up to the most, neither of which are Peter Parker actually. They're his dad and Uncle Aaron. And I think this is an area that really improves on the original Bendis story. The simple dynamic here could be Jefferson good, Aaron bad, but the movie is surprisingly more complex with its characters than that. In Spider-Verse, Aaron isn't presented as a totally uncaring criminal. In fact, I think it's safe to say that he takes a more active interest in Miles' life than Jefferson does. He encourages his interests, even if the tagging they're doing isn't totally legal, but he's also a guy who's clearly in a little over his head and is willing to do some pretty terrible things to get by as the Prowler. Then there's Jefferson, who, refreshingly, also isn't presented as a completely rigid and harsh father figure or as a saint. He's a regular person. He's trying his best, but he has a hard time actually communicating with Miles in the same way that Aaron does. I explain this to show that the dynamic between these three characters can't easily be reduced down to Aaron just being the devil and Jefferson being the angel on Miles' shoulders. It's a lot more grounded and honestly feels a lot more realistic than that. In a movie that features alternate dimensions, multiple Spider-Men, and Nicolas Cage, this is an aspect of the movie that's probably not going to get talked about much, but I really think it's worth noting here, and it goes to show just how much care went into the storytelling. Then there's Peter Parker, and I'm debating how much to really dig into him here because I might dedicate an entire video to this take on the character next week. Haven't really decided yet, we'll see. But I gotta say, at first I had kind of mixed feelings. This older and cruder Peter bears a very heavy resemblance to Jake Johnson's other most well-known character, Nick Miller on the sitcom New Girl. They're both slobs, they're both really funny, and Jake Johnson uses basically the same kind of line deliveries for both. On one hand, I actually really like that character on New Girl, so I had no problems there, but on the other, I kind of had a hard time buying him as Peter Parker. Now, Into the Spider-Verse does buy itself a little bit of leeway here. After all, he's just a Peter Parker, one from many possible dimensions. And the more I thought about it afterwards, the more I actually really liked this weird take on the character. With a few notable exceptions, writers tend not to want Peter to get too old. After a certain point, it can kind of feel like the character's done and seen it all. There's not much left to do to the poor guy. He just repeats the same thing over and over again. Spider-Verse, though, uses this to its advantage. The fact that Peter's life is an endless cycle of beating up bad guys and saving the city, and has been since he was a teenager, is kind of why he's such an emotionally stunted adult. Like a child actor or a promising young athlete, he kind of peaked when he was in his late teens, early 20s, and he's been doing the exact same things ever since. And he's afraid to move on from that, setting up his conflict with Mary Jane, who's actually kind of ready for the next phase of her life. That makes this a surprisingly dark and deep take on the character. This Peter Parker isn't just who Miles wants to be, he's also kind of a cautionary tale of what to avoid. Gwen Stacy obviously has the biggest role outside of Miles and Peter, and I'm a pretty big fan of this interpretation of her. The truth about Gwen, in my opinion anyway, is that her original incarnation was just never that interesting. There was a reason that the Spider-Man writers of the 70s wanted to kill her off so bad and focus on MJ. She was boring. Sure, she was nice, supportive, pretty, but well, they kind of failed to come up with much characterization beyond that. Unlike Mary Jane, who burst into the pages of the comics immediately interesting, witty, and confident, someone who really played well off of Peter's constant neuroses, outside of her famous death, there was just never much to her, and clone storylines and romantic flings with Norman Osborn didn't exactly help. But I liked that Spider-Gwen book that came out a few years ago a lot, which kind of built off Emma Stone's performance in the Amazing movies. This is the Gwen we see in Spider-Verse, and I'm pretty glad to have her here, even if her backstory was kept a little more vague than I was expecting. I'm kind of assuming they want to save that for her own movie. Spider-Ham, Spider-Man Noir, and Penny Parker are all great too. All of them are given just enough characterization to not just be punchlines, but I really think the most fun part of watching them is just how different these styles of animation mesh with Miles' world. They do a great job of selling that each of these characters has an entire universe with its own unique style, tone, and rules. Also, not to be totally hyperbolic here, but I think the case could be made that John Mulaney was the smartest piece of comedy casting in all of 2018. He's kind of amazing as Spider-Ham in a way that I wasn't totally prepared for. The old-timey showbiz voice, the Looney Tunes physics, it all works so well for me in a way that the character never really did for me in the comics.
Those bars! I'm in prison! I've been captured by the police!
This was pretty amazing to see in theaters because it felt like I was watching a movie that almost had no right to be as good as it is. Trying to blend this many tones with such a convoluted plot built to start a new franchise just shouldn't work. But much like writer Phil Lord and producer Chris Miller's other films, The Lego Movie and 21 Jump Street, it just kinda clicks. But that doesn't mean the movie is perfect. On the villain front, they do kind of only meet the minimum requirements. Kingpin is fine here, and given a compelling enough backstory I guess, but his characterization feels a little uninspired, especially coming right off Daredevil Season 3, which had such a great version of the character. I also wish we had a little more time with the Prowler, since he's so important to Miles' story and origin, but at least what we did get was really great. Going any farther into the villains would lead to more spoilery territory, so I guess I'll just say this is the one area of the film that didn't totally work for me and where the characterization tended to be the shallowest. Overall though, it's a little hard to overstate how much I found myself enjoying this movie. I went in with some reservations and I walked out totally blown away. And even though I don't think I'm ready to declare this my favorite Spider-Man movie or anything, it's definitely the best testament to the power of the Spider-Man character. The core ideas that have always been behind the character have been pushed farther than ever here, and it turned out really great. And I'm not gonna lie, that tribute to Stan Lee and Steve Ditko at the end really got me. There's still plenty of movies to be released before this holiday season ends, but Into the Spider-Verse is probably the best present Spider-Man fans could have asked for. If Into the Spider-Verse proves anything, it's that exceeding expectations is absolutely essential. And that's important no matter what you're trying to do, not just in film. If you have a business or freelance career, or even thinking about starting one, it's really important to have an absolutely great and professional website. That's where Wix comes in. What makes Wix so great is there's just so many things you can build with it. It doesn't matter if you're booking clients for work, need a place to create a great gallery online for your art, or want to set up a storefront, Wix has you covered. And they handle the heavy lifting by giving you a reliable hosting site that keeps your work safe and secure. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner or a skilled designer, they're going to have you covered. In fact, I'm making a site with it right now, which I'm really looking forward to showing off to you guys next month. So if you're looking to create a beautiful website, head over to wix.com/go/CaptainMidnight, which I've included a link to in the video description and pinned comment below.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.